Welcome into the Hot Read Podcast for Wednesday, January 17th. I'm your host, Easton Freeze, director of published content here at BroadwaySportsMedia.com. We're also brought to you by the 440 Podcast Network. You can follow me on social media at Easton Freeze. I'm joined as always by producer JT. You can follow on social media at JT_Ruhnke. JT, how are you?
I'm good. I'm weathering this snowmageddon that we seem to be having here in Nashville pretty well, except for the fact that a certain
really unfamiliar territory for you, local Cincinnati man.
Yeah, except my internet was cut out for about 6 hours today, so didn't know if I was going to be able to be here for the show.
Love that.
But now I'm here, and I just have to say, like, it's always fun when it snows like this because it is so laughably hilarious that the way that this city reacts to snow. Yes. I didn't believe it that, like, when we were about to get 6 inches of snow, that everything was going to shut down and the world was going to explode, but it did. And it was very fun to watch. And I do appreciate the good laugh.
It doesn't take 6 inches around here. It takes 1.5 inches for everything to shut down. So this is shut down for a week territory. And yeah, if you're not familiar with Nashville right now, or you don't live in the area, it snowed a lot here by Nashville standards. I think like the average annual snowfall is like 4.7 inches, and Nashville got like 7. And it's really cold outside, so it's not going anywhere. So people are panicking, and it's ice, and people who don't know how to drive, and so cars abandoned on the highway. It's a good time. We're talking coaches today, and we've got an awesome guest once again joining us, friend of the show, James Foster. Let's go ahead and bring him in. Honestly, James is with us once again. You know him better from AtoZFilmRoom on YouTube, No Flags Film on Twitter. James, how's it going, man? How are you weathering the storm?
It's going great, man. I went out for a walk last night, built a fire.
I love that.
Snow is my favorite weather. I wish I got to experience it more often.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. That sounds like a nice time, just in the freezing cold, build a fire out in like a backyard or something. Or did you just go into a random field? Or
yeah, I've got a little fire, like, I don't even know what you would call it, but
a little fire pit.
Yeah, kind of like a closed off fire pit. Took me so long to get it started because it was filled with snow, but
little wet. Yeah, I get it.
Like a nice challenge to get those brain gears working.
Makes you feel like you're roughing it. Yeah, even though we live in a very affluent area. We're talking about coaches today, and the Titans, in case you weren't aware, they need a new head coach, and they are asking all of the people, hey, would you like to be our head coach? Let's talk to them. They've got 10 guys that they have requested to interview, a number of which they have already interviewed via Zoom, which is a funny concept to me. Like, I have so many questions about what a NFL head coach Zoom interview entails. Like, what's the vibe in like, what are the questions? Is it similar to a normal job interview? I tweeted that, and I had somebody respond that, like, I like to think that they don't have the premium subscription, so after 40 minutes it just times out, and just Mike Kafka, like, oh, sorry, bye, you're gone. I have no idea if it's even a productive time to do a Zoom interview. I don't know. I'd love to be a fly on the wall in this situation.
Yeah, I'm sure they're getting timed out, having to send links back and forth. Have some of the interviews been in person, I assume? And then
not yet. They can't be yet. Okay. I think January 22nd is when you can start doing in-person interviews. So next week they'll start having those. And I don't actually know if they will I'm guessing they won't do an in-person interview with all 10 candidates. I feel like the Zoom interviews probably narrows it down to 5 or 6. I don't know. We'll find out. But we are brought to you today, as always, before we dive headfirst into talking about these coaching candidates for the Titans, by Boom Boss Craft Pizza and Tap House. We love being sponsored by Boom Boss because they've got really good food and really good drinks and a really great atmosphere for watching sports live. They've got 3 Middle Tennessee locations, one in East Nashville, one in Murfreesboro, and the location that JT and I go to in Spring Hill, just about 20-25 minutes down I-65 if you're in the Nashville area. It's a phenomenal place to watch sports, grab a bite to eat, and grab a drink. It really is great, and we are there each and every Thursday before Thursday Night Football during the season, but now just Thursdays at 5:30 p.m. watching whatever is on, because there are still sports going on, even though Thursday Night Football is over, and we do our live shows from there. So we'll be back there this Thursday, assuming we don't have to abandon our cars on the side of the highway getting down there. We encourage you to come and join us. It's a great time, and we look forward to it each and every week. So Boom Boss, Craft Pizza, and Tap House, wherever you are in Middle Tennessee, check out the location nearest to you. And if you're joining us live today, do us a couple of favors. First of all, if you're not watching on the YouTube, go watch on the YouTube. It's Broadway Sports Media on YouTube. Find that account, find this live stream, and then in the comment section of this live stream, you can be a part of today's conversation like D Good and Wyatt and Kenneth already are. Appreciate you guys tuning in with us today on a midweek episode. And while you're there, hit subscribe. It's free to you. It's very helpful to us to get those subscriber numbers up. So help us out. Hit subscribe. We see the metrics, folks. We know how many of you are unsubscribed. And that is frankly really silly and disrespectful. You should subscribe. It's very easy for you to do, and it's very helpful to us. So thank you for doing that for us. Before we dive headfirst into the coaching interviews, a quick announcement, little housekeeping thing. Very important, prestigious award was won by this podcast. We were named the Sobros 2023 Sports Podcast of the Year, which frankly, the best part about that is that our buddy Zach Lyons doesn't get to win with either of the shows that he does and get to brag, because it would have been insufferable, the bragging about how he's a multi-time award-winning podcast. So we are glad that we kept him from doing that, but we are appreciative of everybody that voted for us for doing that. So that's cool. I think we'll get a plaque or something, and then we'll make it our entire personality and then be really insufferable in that way. So thank you guys for voting on that. I didn't
realize I was coming on an award-winning podcast show.
This is, in fact, an award-winning podcast now. So the stakes are raised. Everything is more important, and it's a new level for us here. So we appreciate that award from the Sobros guys and Stoney and all of those folks over there that do great work. I wanted to touch real quick on the the super wild card weekend that was. Not a whole lot super about it. 5 blowouts and then 1 nail-biting, awesome narrative driving game with Jared Goff getting his redemption arc and Matt Stafford being an alien, but somehow the team's still being coached by a guy that can't manage the clock. A whole lot there. What, if anything, what was the number one thing that you found most surprising or your biggest takeaway from this weekend, James, in the super wild card weekend? Anything stand out to you?
Yeah, a couple things. The first thing is that they need a new batch of commercials. This current one is just, I can't do it. Once I see the outlet start singing,
the singing outlet. Yep.
I almost never mute commercials or anything, but I was literally racing to the remote this weekend.
we were having a huge discussion about this because I'm right there with you, James.
I think it's a great commercial.
I said this is the worst commercial I've ever seen in my entire life. And we were having a big debate about this, but I'm right there with you. The commercials, I didn't think to bring it up, but now that you mention it,
so
it's been
hang on. Do you think it's a bad commercial or is it just annoying at this point?
Both.
Yeah, I mean it's more annoying because of how many times you've seen it. Sure. I don't know how many they normally have in rotation, but it seems like they made 8 for this couple months, and they don't spice it up. So I'm just hearing the same things over and over again.
I agree there.
Really annoying. This is just especially insufferable group of.
They need to have a brand new batch. None of the commercials that are shown during the regular season should be allowed to be shown in the postseason. It needs to be all new material. I think that's a fair rule.
That's true. As far as what happened on the field, I think that the Browns defense was probably the biggest surprise to me. Although it's really weird. They'll be the best defense almost of all time, 90% of their games. And then they'll have a few where they just can't stop anyone. And there's constant coverage busts. Ronnie Hickman, who's a UDFA, was starting at free safety for them, had one of the worst individual performances, I think, from this weekend. Laramie Tunzel just shut down Myles Garrett. How do you explain the home road splits for that defense? Because that's one of the strangest statistics from this season that I don't really, I don't get it. Yeah, I don't. That's usually the kind of thing that I would just chalk up to noise until there was a bigger sample size. But it's a pretty clear split with them. I feel like. Really the one key thing on tape that's a differentiating factor for the Browns defense is basically just targeting anyone besides Denzel Ward is going to lead to a lot more success. The splits when he's on and off the field, I know, are pretty extreme.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, outside of just the normal home field advantage, I'm not exactly sure, what's leading to that home and away split. So yeah, I think the Browns defense was probably the biggest, negative surprise. Eagles offense is just disgusting. I mean, it's a high school offense. The biggest,
not just the performance, but the coordination, like the plays is what you're referencing, right?
Yeah.
Like I saw a lot of interesting screenshots, which is always a great reference on Twitter of like the middle of the field. Let's just not touch it.
Right. People always do those tweets where it's like a screenshot of a Madden play and it's like so-and-so's playbook or whatever. And it's always a extreme oversimplification, except with the Eagles offense. Like
this is the exception.
It's the tush push and then like 2 or 3 more plays.
Well, hey, and we solved the tush push. Turns out it was Vita Vea. Who knew?
Yeah, all you have to do is just grab Jalen Hurts' face mask and pull him backwards.
Yeah,
but yeah, having the nose tackle get underneath the center, like establish underneath, that seems to be the main way to stop it. And then like positive surprises, I guess, Jordan Love just really over the past back half of the season, like when people do their quarterback tiers heading into next year, I don't know how you keep him out of the top 5 or 7.
Yeah.
He's been playing elite football.
Better quarterback today, Stroud or Love?
Ooh.
Because I think contract-wise, you go Stroud because you don't have to pay him for.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you're saying who would you rather have,
right? But better. I mean, I'd take that out.
Stroud would be number 1 in the NFL
in the whole league. Yes, but take that out of it. Just better player.
If I was doing a quarterback tier, they would be on the exact same row, and it would just depend the ordering. I might go with.
It's so hard,
man. It's so tight.
It's so hard.
I might like go with Stroud, gun to my head, but especially because I think projecting to next year, there's probably going to be a bigger next step for CJ Stroud than Jordan Love.
Right.
But
I was going to ask if I told you one of them like kind of takes a step back and struggles a bit next year, who you think it would be? I would think it's more likely to be Love than Stroud personally, but maybe not. I don't know.
It could be. The thing with Love though, is that his weapons and surrounding core are only going to get better.
Yes. Yep.
It's like the youngest group of pass catchers ever,
and free.
And a lot of his, like he didn't play that well the first half of the season, but a lot of that was on the people he was throwing the ball to. Like if they would just catch the ball, I think that there would have been a lot less extreme negativity towards Jordan Love early in the season. But he himself also took a major step forward over the back half.
It's so funny how it went from in the early season a punchline to now it's like a scary thing. Like in week 7, it was like, well, he's got the youngest group of weapons around him in the league. And now it's like, oh God, he's got the youngest group of weapons around him in the league. Is it lazy, not to get too much on a tangent here, because we are going to talk about the Titans coaching position. Is it lazy to say it's really hard to watch Jordan Love and not feel like there are times when he's doing like a good Aaron Rodgers impression? Like it feels like he's done so much watching Aaron over the years and like being around Aaron that the way that he operates, sometimes I'm like, oh my God, that's just him again. They just got another one.
Yeah. It's the flexibility of his, release points and the ability to not always have perfectly tight textbook footwork and still get rid of the ball accurately. There's definitely some similarities there. And I'm sure all the time that they spent together is playing a factor in that. We'll just have to see what weird off the field like tick Jordan Love picks up.
I was literally about to ask, like, what's the thing? Is he gonna be like, is he gonna be really involved in like Middle Eastern politics? Like, what's the thing that's gonna really turn people off with him?
Yeah,
he has to follow in line somewhere.
He's probably gonna be like a flat earther, I guess, unless
full Kyrie Irving
already done that. Yeah.
I don't think Aaron's planted his flag on that corner, so that's open. That's available. We'll have to see because it's coming. Okay, last wild card weekend question, and then I promise we'll move on. Which team are you like? Which team's future are you more depressed about if you're a fan, the Eagles or the Cowboys? First of all, should they fire their coaches? And second of all, which is like a bleaker future?
Okay, so I'll answer the second question first. I think the more bleak future is probably the Cowboys, because
really?
It's weird because neither of them are like
Eagles are old, man.
Of talent. They each have certain parts of their roster that are aging. Like the Cowboys are going to lose Tyron Smith either next year or the year after that. DeMarcus Lawrence is getting up there in age. Stephon Gilmore, Zach Martin, and then like Brandon Cooks. And then the Eagles obviously have Jason Kelce, Lane Johnson, Fletcher Cox. So like there's defense, there's parts of their roster that are aging, but they've also drafted
Kevin Byard. Hello.
Yeah, although I wouldn't even include him as like a high level contributor for them. But
right.
But yeah, they've both drafted well, but they've got key parts of their roster that they're going to have to replace. I think for the Cowboys, I hardly ever do like, can they win the big game analysis, which I think is just really lazy. But with Mike McCarthy, Cowboys, it's like they might be cursed, man. Like I don't.
Yeah,
I would. Yeah. With the Eagles, like if they actually, let's say next year the Eagles get off to a similar start, but they're actually playing well,
right?
I would be, as an Eagles fan, I would be fully willing to buy into the Eagles and like enjoy the season and believe they could win the Super Bowl. With the Cowboys, it's like whatever they do, it's a wake me up in January type of situation.
That's what I was going to say. You have to, as a fan, you have to feel so defeated because there's so many depressed. Like I saw no team has ever won 12 or more games in 3 straight seasons and not been to a conference championship game. And then another one is in the entire history of the Cowboys organization, there have been 6 seasons in which they have won 12 or more games in the regular season and 0 games in the playoffs. And 3 of those 6 instances have been Dak and McCarthy. Like it's all they do is just win a ton of games and beat up on bad teams and then fold in January, which I think is really entertaining and fun. But
yeah, and to James' point right there about these 2 teams getting a lot older, like personally, I think most people would want to back Howie Roseman and being able to evaluate talent over Jerry Jones and that operating group. Because like you said, Jason Kelce, a lot of these guys are getting up there in age, but I mean, they have some dudes that they've drafted in the past couple of years, like last year with Tyler Steens out of Alabama. Like they have guys waiting in the wings that could develop. I think another one also that has kind of gone under the radar, Isaiah Rodgers is on that team. If he somehow gets out of his gambling suspension, like that team, that's a piece that they add to the secondary. Like I'm backing Howie Roseman over whatever Jerry Jones' evil plan is next. Like,
I agree.
That's where I'm
Bill
at
Belichick
right
profit. Yeah.
Okay. I would just say, as far as like firing Nick Sirianni, I think it seems premature to fire him.
On paper.
Nick Wright made the point where it's like, if you think about the rest of the teams and ask yourself the question about if we fired our head coach, would anyone else want to hire him? And the answer is no. Then why should he be your head coach? And like, that's true. If Nick Sirianni gets fired, I don't know who's hiring him, even though
and Kevin Clark made a similar point. He said the Eagles have fired better coaches than Nick Sirianni.
Mm-hmm. Although
like in recent
fired Andy Reid,
like Andy Reid was a better coach. Doug Peterson, I think, is and was a better coach. So Nick Sirianni, get ready to learn Maction, bud. Okay, let's talk about the Titans coaching search. They need a new coach, and that is something that's going to get ramped up. I think historically the coaching hires start to happen like late January, early February. I know last year they did, like the first one happened in the last week of January, and then they trickled out from there. As we said, the Titans have requested to hire 10 guys, and we're going to talk about all of them a little bit today. I want to, before we dive into the individual guys, I want to run this take by you, James, and then get your general opinion on like the analysis scene on coaches and in a coaching hire. Here's how I feel, and I think it's a little bit different for most folks in our shoes. I'm much more interested in the type of coach that the Titans hire than who the actual guy is. And the reason why is just because every year we hear about who's a good hire and who's a bad hire, and it's all this definitive language. And then, a guy that's supposed to be a home run turns out to be a bum. And then, you get a popularly mocked guy like Dan Campbell, and then he turns out to be, Dan Campbell. That happens a lot. I think fit within an existing team structure and culture and relationship building skills and all these intangible things, they matter so much more to me, at least, that I find trying to decide if a guy will be or won't be good on day one of their coaching tenure largely a waste of time, a little like a waste of my time, at least. It certainly gets clicks. It's just not really my thing. I want to see the things I'm interested in. I want to see the direction the team leadership wants to go based on the kind of coach they hire. Like, I want to speak to the guy, who actually gets the job, find out what he's like as a man, what he's like as a leader. I want to evaluate the first couple of decisions they make and the coaching staff hires that he makes in his first offseason. That's the kind of thing that I think people should be more focused on with a new coach coming to town. The specific name and their resume matters less than I think a lot of people tend to think. Does that resonate at all with you? What's your opinion on you? If you don't get this guy, you failed. And if you hire this guy, then it's a disaster.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that, of any kind of analysis that I or like other media people do surrounding the NFL, head coach and general manager hires are probably the least like just solid opinions like that I'll ever have.
Right.
There's no way of knowing. Honestly,
it's a lot of guesswork.
It's not a kind of situation where like I have my opinions on how on my preferences for the different Titans head coaching candidates, but I'm not really dug into any of those takes. And, I put out a tier list on Twitter. I could just as easily see the actual best head coaches being the reverse order of that outside of Brian Johnson. That would shock me, but hey, it still could happen.
The guy you called an elementary offensive coordinator earlier. Yeah, I believe that.
So yeah, I think the issue is that a lot of times we tend to just evaluate these people as coordinators, and evaluating how good an offensive coordinator is, that alone is still difficult. It's hard to separate the players and the execution from the scheme and the play calling, but coordinating and play calling, that might be 30-40% of their actual job. As a head coach, you're general manager and CEO. You have to be able to relate to different people that are, come from different backgrounds, are getting paid different amounts of money. You have to be able to, have a good sense for all the intricacies of what's going on in your organization and have those organizational skills. There's also like some team building, player evaluation skills that come into that. Like you can look at Brandon Staley and like the JC Jackson move, I think was probably, that was a signing that he played a major role in, and probably the most consequential single move of his tenure as LA's head coach. If they had a quality press man corner, I think that the defense would have been a lot better and probably could have bought him some more time, for example. So yeah, there's so many other elements that go into it, where just evaluating an offensive or defensive coordinator from the outside, just have really no insight into all of their leadership and management skills.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. That being said, let's talk about how each guy is a good or bad hire.
Yeah,
we're going to dive into each guy, but I'm glad that we got that baseline on the table, because I completely agree with everything that you said, and I think that it's fun to like try to rank these things and tier these things and talk about who is and isn't going to be a coordinator. But it's really a good coach. But it's really important to realize there's so much more that goes into it than their resume and how they were as a coordinator and all of that. Okay. We got some commenters here. Like Joey says that listening to Amy's comments after firing Vrabel, when asked about a timing for trade, it sounded like the Titans already had a candidate they really like. All signs point to Slowick, I would presume. I don't know if that's necessarily true, but I understand what you're saying, that maybe they had a guy in mind. If they do, they certainly are not letting it keep them from evaluating a bunch of different folks and talking to a bunch of different folks, which I think is a good process. Kenneth says, I need James to explain some coordinator requests that are just baffling to me. Brian Johnson, Thomas Brown, Dan Quinn, Mike Kafka, ick. I think James is about to justify maybe 3 of those. So let's dive into these individual guys. And I know, James, you put out a tier list of the guys that got a lot of flack from some of our favorite local media members the other day. And so let's start from that baseline. And if you have any adjustments, we can hear those now, and then we can talk about these guys in order. But your tier list.
You want me to give my adjustments before or after you read the tier?
Go ahead. Tell us the current list.
All right. So I would say tier 1 would be Ben Johnson.
Sure.
And I had doubt it in parentheses because it seems like the Titans are not really players for him, but
sure.
That would be number 1 option for me. I think Brian Callahan would also be in tier 1. I would say tier 2 is I would make I would add a tier, make tier 2 Mike McDonald. He was originally in tier 1. Just because he's a defensive coordinator. I think the whole thing with like wanting to hire an offensive guy so you have that continuity no matter how successful the offense gets. I agree with that. I also think, though, it's a lot easier said than done. Like it's easy to make a bad hire with an offensive head coach, and a good defensive coach is still better than a bad offensive coach.
Sure.
But yeah, Mike McDonald would be alone in tier 2. Tier 3, I would probably go Antonio Pierce and Aaron Glenn.
Okay.
I've heard like so many, a lot of my opinions on people's leadership ability and stuff like that is going to be just like secondhand information and quotes that people give to the media and stuff. So it's not, it's a little questionable, but I've heard so many great things about Aaron Glenn in that phase. So I'd put them there. And then I think Mike Kafka would probably be at the top of tier 4, and then Bobby Slowick at the bottom of tier 4.
People are going to have a lot of questions about tier 4. I'm looking forward to talking about tier 4.
And then tier 5, this is the big adjustment. I don't know what I was doing with Dan Quinn in tier 3. Like even setting aside the playoff thing. When I looked back at the tier list like an hour or so after I tweeted, I'm like, I don't know why I put Dan Quinn.
What was I thinking? Yeah.
Dan Quinn down in tier 5 with I think alone in tier 5, and then tier 6 would be Brian Johnson.
Brian Johnson in his own tier.
I would still take Dan Quinn over Brian Johnson, like snap of a finger.
That's crazy. It's not crazy, but it's. I agree, but it feels ridiculous. Let's start at the bottom and work our way up. Let's get the negative guys out of the way, because I feel like you'll have more to talk about with the guys do you actually like. And it is important to note, like you said, a lot of your opinion is going to be based on the actual X's and O's, like what these guys did as coordinators, and less to do with their leadership ability and all of those intangibles. But, you got to start at ground 1. Can you coach or can you not? So at the very bottom, let's discuss Brian Johnson. I don't think anybody's going to have any issue after watching that playoff game, at the very least, with Brian Johnson being all the way down here at the bottom. I guess it is a fair question to wonder how much flack he deserves for like the toxicity and the total and utter collapse of the Eagles this year. I don't think it's unfair to ask how much of a responsibility he has for the, like you said, really pedestrian, really elementary and bad scheme that offense was running, and the deficiencies there, especially down the stretch. He's a guy that, he's worked under Nick Sirianni. He was previously Jalen Hurts' quarterback coach. He was a former quarterback, coached under Kyle Whittingham and Dan Mullen at Utah and Florida. We can be quick on him. What are the reasons why he's a bad candidate? The worst candidate, actually.
Yeah, I mean, it's mainly just a stagnant offensive scheme. Doesn't really attack the middle of the field, rarely uses motion. I think I know they were last in the league in motion rate, but it was by a significant margin. I would be interested to see what he looks like with a quarterback that's capable of going under center, because having to be in shotgun basically every snap just limits your, especially early down playbooks, so much.
Yes.
And so I think that he is kind of coaching with one hand tied behind his back, but one of the least inspiring offensive schemes and play callers that I've seen in recent memory. And so, yeah, he would have to blow me away in the interviews for me to like give him 5th place in the coaching, in the coaching search, I guess. So yeah, sure. that would not be a serious consideration for me. And one of the few that I would be pretty upset about.
Okay, let's move on to the next guy who you have close to the same level of at the bottom, and the performance that he and his team put up this weekend certainly did not help from a narrative standpoint, his head coach candidacy, even though he's got a number of requests. Dan Quinn, Cowboys defensive coordinator. He'd be a retread. He's been a coach for a long time. He's been a head coach before. JT, very familiar with Dan Quinn, the head coach during his Atlanta days. It feels like, especially the Shanahanites have had him figured out since 2016. And I don't know if you have ever picked up on this. Shanahan had a thing today in a presser he was doing for their game upcoming, where he kind of winked and nodded at the fact that this guy blows. I love playing Dan Quinn because he's so easy to play against, which is funny. But at this point, I think it's borderline bullying because it's so often that they do this. Can you make a case for why Dan Quinn would be worth giving another head coaching opportunity, besides the fact that for a minute there as the Cowboys defensive coordinator, they were awesome, even though they had, awesome players?
No.
Okay. The next guy that
any case that you make for Dan Quinn as head coach you would just end up at the conclusion of we should have just kept Mike Vrabel.
Yes.
The biggest thing with him schematically is they've all year had no answer for motion. I don't have the stats in front of me, but I bet if you looked at defensive success rate on plays where the offense uses motion, I bet Dallas would rank near the bottom of the league. And just weird management of the middle of their defense. They don't have great linebackers, but they just play with so much light personnel. They've got Marquise Bell, who's a converted safety that's playing linebacker for them. And they'll play nickel to 12 personnel and just get gashed in the run game. They've done it all year. Part of that is probably limitations of the roster, but hasn't shown great adaptability on that front.
Okay. I thought, again, I don't think anybody really has an issue with that. Those two because we started all of this talking about how I don't want to rush to judgment on any of these hires. I'm willing to give guys that were less popular candidates a chance. That being said, I'd have a hard time with those two. The rest of these guys, the next 8 that we're going to discuss, I genuinely would be willing to hear them out if they were the hire. My favorite tier that we're going to talk about here is tier 4. And like you said, you've got Bobby Slowick and Mike Kafka in this tier. Let's start with the guy that a lot of people, I think, are too low on. Mike Kafka, offensive coordinator this past year for the Giants. The biggest resume concern with him is just experience. Didn't get into coaching until 2016. And that was as a grad assistant at Northwestern. He's a former NFL.
Cons, you can't practice during the day.
Exactly. He's a vampire, and he's got a funny look on his face at all times. He's a former NFL quarterback. He's worked under some really fantastic coaches. Like he's worked with Andy Reid and Eric Bieniemy in Kansas City. He was the quarterback's coach with the Chiefs, with a pretty good quarterback, passing game coordinator before then. Then joined Brian Daboll with the Giants. I don't know if have you read anything this week about that? I think it was one article in particular about the behind the scenes turmoil. Apparently Daboll's like kind of a toxic jerk. And do you have any thoughts on that situation? For folks that don't know, apparently like Daboll constantly, he's an offensive guy too. He's constantly questioning Mike Kafka over the headset and like blaming him for losing games in the game and telling him when to run and not to run, and then criticizing his every move.
Tell him to run and then get mad at him
when he runs
for the run that he called or something.
Yeah.
That I think that a lot of it seemed like he did a good job elevating what was a bad offensive roster in 2022.
Yeah.
And in 2023, a lot of that magic kind of wore off. That's a situation with Mike Kafka where you've got an offensive coordinator and then an offensive minded head coach. And it's just really difficult from the outside to, figure out who to credit and who to blame for different things that go wrong, because I don't really know exactly the breakdown of their roles. So yeah, Mike Kafka, I think that I would say Mike Kafka and probably Brian Callahan from a scheme standpoint are the two that I have the least real solid insight into. Obviously,
look like
we'll get to Callahan, but he's not actually calling plays. So I think Mike Kafka, what he did in 2022 kind of had my starting point with him was generally positive, but for example, I think that I would prefer Mike Vrabel to Mike Kafka.
So we've not yet reached the point where you can justify the firing of Mike Vrabel.
Well, justify is a different word. I think with Mike Vrabel, like I would have him probably as the 13th to 15th best head coach.
Right.
And if I was going to rationalize the firing of Mike Vrabel, it's that he's not really elevating the roster, and you could do better than him. So if you're going into it with the philosophy of like, there's a chance that the next guy we hire is going to be worse, but to get where we want to go, we want one of these like true game changers that's in the top 5. And so we're just going to like swing for the fences. That would be kind of my rationalization for it. And so merely the
really
fact
taking a big next step.
The fact that all of these guys are unknown, except for like Dan Quinn and retreads, the fact that they're unknown and we don't actually know how good of head coaches they are, that alone gives them a little bit of edge over Mike Vrabel, who I think is kind of a known quantity at this point.
Right. Okay. Well, we're going to talk about Bobby Slowick here in just a second, which I think most people would take issue with your opinion on him. because he's very popular amongst Titans fans, especially after this past weekend. Before we do, again, if you're with us live and joining mid-show, thanks for tuning in. We're talking Titans coaches today. If you are not watching on the YouTube, go on over to Broadway Sports Media's YouTube page, find this live stream. In the comment section of that live stream is where you can be a part of today's conversation, like so many of you already are. Alex Titan says he just got here. Not sure if you guys spoke about Nick Sirianni as a head coach. Y'all think Philly cans him? And if so, how would he stack up as a Titans candidate? I'll give you the 10-second rundown. We did talk about him. We do think he gets fired, and he shouldn't be a candidate. Glad I could help you out there. Okay. Bobby Slowick, offensive coordinator for the Texans, first year offensive coordinator for the Texans, formerly with San Francisco. In what capacity was he coaching with San Francisco? I don't know this off the top of my head.
I think he was a defensive guy, and then they moved him to offense. I know he has experience
on both sides of the ball.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is his first year as an offensive coordinator. Obviously, a Shanahanite, worked in San Fran with Ran Carthon at the time. He learned under Kyle Shanahan. He was a member of the infamous, oft talked about on national broadcasts, Washington 2010 coaching staff that produced Shanahan and McVay and Mike McDaniel and Matt, all the play callers. He's become very, very popular because of the year that he's had helping turn around the Texans and developing CJ Stroud and turning that offense into a team that can embarrass one of the best defenses we've ever seen on national television in Wild Card Weekend. It's in a microcosm. One of my favorite things about the way that we talk about these guys, the way that a wild card playoff game, it has serious folks be like, well, he was fourth in my rankings, but now he's now he's first. It's like, really? We're gonna pretend one game is okay. Gotcha. That's good process.
I like to think that Amy Adams Strunk had all of the wild card games like on a ticker, just like up on a projector.
right.
She had someone physically moving them up and down the coaching search board as they scored more points.
Yes, I mean there are folks seriously in the media who I generally respect who, in one breath, 2 weeks ago will be like, it is bad and reactive that Amy Adams Strunk fired John Robinson after the Eagles game, and then she fired Mike Gribble because they got beat by Houston twice this year. That's bad process. And then they're like, by the way, here's my definitive rankings of the head coaches. Bobby Slowick up 4 spots based on his wild card performance. Maybe let's reassess. Let's take a step back and look at how we're doing things a little bit there. He has had a really nice year though. And so like when you look at the totality of the season, it's not just this one. I'm not saying this one game is not a reflection of how he's done all year. I think, not to steal your thunder here, your big pushback on him as a head coach, besides the experience thing, is the fact that he's been working with some pretty, like, his toolbox is not bare. He's got some really nice chess pieces he's been working with on that Texans offense. Explain why you wouldn't consider him a top tier option for the Titans.
So I think that he is a solid top half of the league offensive coordinator.
Sure.
Like I don't think he should be on the hot seat in Houston. I would keep him for another year. I think that the supporting cast. So let's start with the offensive coordinator aspect of it, and then we can get to the other part. I think that the idea of him turning around Houston's offense and like creating it, forming it into this elite unit is kind of overblown and doesn't really match up with the numbers or what I've watched all year. I was actually very surprised that there was so much pushback to Bobby Slowick in tier 4. I didn't realize he was like thought of as a top tier candidate. It's weird to me, the negativity around Tim Kelly, when like the Titans ranked 16th in EPA per play, and then the Texans ranked 15th in EPA per play. And, and all of a sudden like Slowick is going to be this major upgrade when he has a franchise left tackle. He's got a much better quarterback. He's got much better receivers. I mean, Tank Dell and Nico Collins are better than anything the Titans had. I think even outside of Laramie Tunzel, better offensive line all around, especially when they're healthy. Shaq Mason had an all-pro league caliber year, in my opinion. And when you watch them on tape, it's a different situation from someone like Mike McDaniel or Kyle Shanahan. It's an offensive coordinator that's calling good plays, but not necessarily pushing the envelope or, really innovating, which is fine. Like there's very few offensive masterminds that are reinventing the wheel every week. But it's like play action, deep post shots. I like in the playoff matchup that they got away from forcing so many early down runs, which I don't necessarily think is just a universal blanket, like never run on early downs. I'm a lot.
I was about to say Titans fans are in for a rude awakening with the run pass situation.
Oh yeah, they're gonna hate it.
It's gonna be awesome. But they want him now. They just don't realize what they're asking for.
No, yeah, Titans fans are gonna hate Bobby Slowick.
It's gonna take 3 months, and they're gonna switch on him so fast.
I think something that we probably should have mentioned when we started this conversation is that regardless of what happens at head coach, and regardless of whether or not they should have fired Mike Vrabel, their number one and probably number two problems still exist, which is offensive line and receiver. So no matter who gets hired, they're going to face the same problem, which is that they don't have anyone who is starting quality at either tackle spot. So,
well, it depends on how the offseason goes. They may.
Well, no, I just mean like when they get hired.
Day one, yes, yeah, that issue's not going to be resolved. Totally.
So, yeah, it's on the front office then to fix that. But even like for next year, we've seen Peter Skoronski, who the day one All Pro. Peter Skoronski struggle as a rookie, which should be expected for rookie offensive linemen. So even if you take Joe Olufashanu, it's not a given that they're just going to come in and immediately be playing at their peak potential. So gotta say that. But yeah, I mean, I think he's.
Is it fair to say that they'll immediately be better than what the Titans? I mean, like good and better are different, but yeah.
Yeah, I think at one tackle spot, I would. Assuming they take a tackle in the first round, I think that one tackle spot, fair to expect them to be better than they were this year.
Yes.
So yeah, I think Bobby Slowick is a solid offensive coordinator. I think that the playoff game was definitely the best game that he called. But even within that, it's weird, like that touchdown that they threw to Dalton Schultz, where they fake the flood concept, like roll out.
They get every defender moving one way, and then Schultz leaks the other way. That one,
right? Like that's the exact same touchdown. That was Will Levis's fourth touchdown against the Falcons.
It's NWI. Yep.
Play call, except the Titan Will Levis was in pistol,
and Tim Kelly's a bum. Like that's the difference, obviously.
Right. So like, yeah, I see Bobby Slowick and Tim Kelly as very in very similar tiers of play callers, is like solid, good, not great play callers. Should definitely deserving of an offensive coordinator spot and capable of leading a top half of the league offense, and even better if you give them good personnel.
Can I play devil's advocate on that just one thing real quick? I'm not even sure that I fully think this, but a lot of folks will point to the success in recent years of you get a head coach that's a Shanahanite that has experience putting young or sometimes limited quarterbacks in situations to succeed, like a little bit of a training wheels situation. Is there a benefit to having that guy in the room as opposed to a Tim Kelly with a young quarterback like Will Levis, who doesn't necessarily need the training wheels, but you have some confidence that they're going to set them up for success out of the gate?
Who would be the limited quarterback in this situation that Bobby Slowick has experience putting the training wheels on?
Brock Purdy, Jimmy G.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think that if we're talking about, if we're separating it from Houston and talking about San Francisco,
and to be clear, I don't mean Slowick in particular. I just mean the general Shanahan ethos, like the brain trust has had a good all of them. The idea of Shanahan offense has done, I think, the best job of putting limited quarterbacks in positions to succeed. Just to make that clear.
Yeah, I think
maybe you disagree with that.
Yeah, I would disagree that it's as automatic as a lot of people make it out to be.
Okay.
Like, I think that Todd Downing's offense has a lot of similarities to the Shanahan scheme, like, especially kind of the 2016 to 2018 version of it. The thing with Kyle Shanahan is that he's, and what sets him apart is it's not that he just has the good scheme. It's that he's constantly reinventing himself and recreating it, adapting to how other teams are countering it. And he has the foresight to know that teams are watching film all off season and coming up with ways to, to slow him down. So he has the, expectation of what they're going to do. But yeah, I mean, I think that someone like Todd Downing that, majors in a lot of the same concepts, and would theoretically, be an offense that's kind of quarterback friendly. We've seen people like that not have success. I do think, though, that the Shanahan scheme is just as a default option, a good place to go for a head coaching candidate. And it's historically had a pretty good success rate for head coaches.
Right.
So that's my thing with the coordinating side of it, which is that like I don't want to like paint myself into like I don't want to.
You're not saying he's a bad coordinator.
Yeah, that he's like a bad offensive coordinator. It's just it's
maybe not
something
elevating
like Ben Johnson, where it's not something like Ben Johnson where I think he runs a truly innovative scheme, and like that's an offensive mind that I want on the coaching staff. Bobby Slowick is kind of just like calling the good passing concepts and stuff. I think from a passing game standpoint, he is a lot better than running the ball. But then there's also, he's one of the few head coaches or head coaching candidates where there's been some information that's kind of come out about like how he projects into a bigger role. Teron Davenport said on, I think, Stillman's show, mentioned a couple times that he had heard that Shanahan or that Slowick wasn't ready, didn't have full buy-in, and that there was kind of some people pulling in different directions on the Texans in the Texans organization. When I tweeted that list out, I actually got multiple people like that kind of would know
Flex?
that no, not direct sources, just like people said like, hey,
I had Cal McNair in my DMs.
Yeah, man. I had CJ Stroud in my DMs saying Bobby Slowick was trash.
It's all me. This guy doesn't do anything.
Yeah, I'm not like a sources guy, but just a lot of the smoke seems to be kind of concerning on that front. So Slowick would be in my tier 4, and wouldn't surprise it would if I had to guess, I would say he's Houston's offensive coordinator next year. But
so if it's your choice, Kafka or Slowick, are you choosing Kafka? Or are you just retaining Mike Vrabel?
I would flip a coin.
Okay.
And then probably choose Kafka.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. Let's move to tier 3. I didn't realize this. I don't think you mentioned the most, I think the most recent guy on the list, Thomas Brown out of Carolina. Was he on your list?
So that wasn't announced when I did my list, and
Where would you slot him?
I haven't done enough research on him to
fair enough.
To give an answer on that. I do know that just the results from this year, I don't think tell the whole picture with him, tell the whole story with him. So
I agree.
I would, keep an open mind instead of just like looking at this year's Panthers record. There's a lot more that went into that situation.
Okay, so if I'm remembering correctly here, your tier 3 is Aaron Glenn and AP. Is that the next guys that you have on your list?
Yep.
Okay. All right. So let's start with the guy least likely, I think, to be the Titans head coach, because I think he's going to be the Raiders head coach. Antonio Pierce, he's got some of his star players putting out public ultimatums that if the Raiders don't hire this guy to be the full-time head coach, then I'll explore a trade, which I think is hilarious. And I do think if you have to consider Antonio Pierce coming to the Titans a tier 3 option, if it's Antonio Pierce in a package deal with Max Crosby, maybe that then becomes an A tier option. But that being said, I think he's going to be the Raiders head coach. It sounds like he's going to be the Raiders head coach. If he isn't, for some reason, if they, I don't know, land Harbaugh or get horny for Belichick or whatever they do to get away from Antonio Pierce, what is it about him that is intriguing to you? He's not got a ton of coaching experience, and he's not, it's like, as far as I'm aware, he's not a big X's and O's guy. The Raiders ownership themselves have been on the record this year talking about how they really asked him when he stepped in to be the interim head coach this year to be a CEO, to be a delegator, to not necessarily be like a traditional head coach, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But what is it about him that you think makes him a tier 3 option?
Yeah, it's basically what you said, that, you can't, I think it's a situation where you can't deny the results, and, just
the players,
the buy-in and how the players seem to rally around him. I think that could be an interesting option as more of the CEO, leader of men type. I think, he could be anything. He could even be Mike Vrabel. But that
it could be a boat.
So that's where I think the Vrabel line is to me.
Okay.
Where with Antonio Pierce, you're kind of like making a lateral step, relatively of similar tier options, in my opinion.
Okay, well, like we said, I'm at the point where I'll be shocked if he's not the Raiders' next head coach. So we can move on, and if he's not, then we'll talk more about him in the future. Aaron Glenn, also a defensive guy, also in this third tier for you. Lions defensive coordinator. He's a guy that at first a lot of folks were shocked by this because he, just on the surface, he's the guy that oversees the side of the ball that a lot of people think is the reason the Lions aren't a true Super Bowl contender. Although that defense has gotten better under him, in my opinion. And I think that he's playing with some pieces that are not super sufficient. And when I watch it, and I'm so much less of an X's and O's guy than you, but when I try to be, and I watch the tape, or I watch the broadcast, it feels like even though that defense is limiting, he still has some pitches that he can throw where you're like, okay, you can work with that. There's some ingenuity there. There's some creativity there. He's a former player. He's got a lot of the big thing for him from a leader of men standpoint is, I think it was the NFLPA ran their poll with all the players of their favorite coordinators, and he was the number 1 most loved coordinator by his own players, which I thought on the surface was very funny when that came out, that all the Lions defenders were like, our defense kind of sucks sometimes, but it's not the coordinator's fault, which implies it's their fault. What are your thoughts on Aaron Glenn as a potential candidate?
I think a lot of similar things to say about Aaron Glenn as Antonio Pierce or
Sure.
Mike Vrabel, just as someone that I think is not a guarantee, but a pretty sure bet that going to get buy-in from the players, and you're going to have that locker room chemistry and all the intangible stuff. I've heard so many good, just good reviews. It's always hard when people are giving public quotes about a coach because they're almost never going to be negative, and you have to differentiate between extreme over the top positivity and just kind of tepid positivity.
Right.
But the reactions and just opinions of Aaron Glenn seem to be so overwhelmingly positive from people in that organization. Mike Payton, who works at AtoZ Sports, he was saying that he actually thinks Aaron Glenn is a better head coaching candidate than Ben Johnson.
Hello.
So,
is this a guy that covers the Lions?
He covers the Lions, yeah.
Okay.
And then I think as far as his defensive scheme, last year last year they were really undermanned in the secondary, and I felt like at times he was trying to do too much with, like, especially early in the year, they were trying some crazy coverage rotations and, like, getting into cover 2, like having guys travel 15 yards across the field, like just trying to do way too much to overcompensate. But it was also something where no matter what they tried, their secondary just couldn't cover. Like when they would run man coverage, Amani Arawarye and Jeff Okuda were getting beat. When they were run zone coverage, the linebackers were just too stiff cinder block shoes to cover anyone over the middle of the field. And I think as the personnel has improved, you've seen some improvement in the results. And, I do think if they had better corners that people would think of him a lot more highly, just as a defensive mind. So yeah, with Aaron Glenn, it's really just the fact that he's a defensive head coach is the one kind of negative for me.
Sure. Okay, let's move on to these last 3 guys. Is it fair to say that this is kind of the line of demarcation where if they hired any of these 3 guys that we're about to talk about, you would be genuinely excited about them coming in to coach? Johnson, Callahan, and McDonald.
Yeah, I think that McDonald, again, just the defensive coach kind of thing of like, in 7 years, are we going to end up in the exact same position?
Right.
That would be my concern. But as far as like what he would do defensively, yeah, I think that would be the line of demarcation.
So let's talk about that, because obviously I want to talk about the things that make him different as a defensive coach candidate than the other guys that we've talked about so far. Just a background, 36 years old, primarily worked under Jim and John Harbaugh, inherited this Ravens defense that was kind of in a tough spot when he started. They led the league in sacks this season, which is something that I think folks wouldn't have predicted based on the personnel that they had up there. They got the 1 seed. The defense is the strength of their team. That defense, they rank 5th in simulated pressure rate. He does a lot of things that are, I think that he's the one defensive coach that most fits the alluded to vision that this team, this ownership group has for the Titans going forward, the innovative, creative, collaborative guy. Is that the reason why he's so high for you as well?
The reason he's so high for me is because I think he's one of the 2 or 3 best defensive coordinators in the NFL this year. Probably, one of the 2 best in terms of pressure design. And, just you look not only at the personnel that they have on paper with guys like Jadeveon Clowney, Justin Madubuike, solid players, but not necessarily stars that are having star level seasons from a production standpoint. And then when you go watch them, like I did a video on Justin Madubuike, and I was trying to figure out how to frame it for like the Ravens fans who are going to watch it to where it didn't feel like I didn't come off as like a hater.
Yeah.
But my conclusion was really like, yeah, this is kind of being schemed up for him. Cause guys aren't really being asked to win as many one-on-one matchups. There's so many stunts, simulated pressures, creepers, all of that kind of stuff. And just really multiple coverage philosophy. I think that I think with the defensive personnel that the Titans have currently, I think he would be a good fit. And then, also heard good things about his leadership and off the field, in the locker room, in the building type of stuff. Obviously, that's a lot less solid of a evaluation point with pretty much all these candidates, though.
Okay, fair enough. Let's go ahead and move to these last 2 guys. And I think one of them is a it sounds like genuinely a potential candidate for the Titans, and one, like you said at the top, not super expecting them to be in the race for him. Brian Callahan is your tier 2 guy. He is the offensive coordinator for the Bengals. As you mentioned earlier, important to note, not actually calling plays. So there's a good bit of unknown in terms of what he would be, if he would be a guy that would come in and actually oversee the offense in that way, or whether or not he would bring in an OC under him to call the plays. But he was the first known candidate for the vacancy, reported by our guy Justin Mello, which was cool. Doesn't call plays. Zach Taylor does that as the head coach, but Brian Callahan clearly instrumental with the install of the red zone offense, and then the various responsibilities that he has in terms of helping the team, helping the offense between games adjust and establish game plan and do all of these things that I've been really impressed with. I think that he deserves a decent amount of respect and responsibility for Jake Browning being able to come in and do what he did this year. Of course, Joe Burrow has been really fantastic under Callahan as the OC. He's been in football forever. He's the son of a guy that a lot of folks will recognize, Bill Callahan, legendary offensive line coach, which if they came as a package deal, that'd be nice. Bring him in to be the offensive line coach for the Titans, and then they'd be cooking. But he's been a part of a lot of really good coaching staffs. He's crossed paths with Eric Studsville, who's currently the Dolphins assistant head coach and running back coach, Wink Martindale, John Fox, Ron Miles, who's the Colts secondary coach, Frank Smith, who's the Dolphins offensive coordinator, Corey Undlin, who's the Texans defensive passing game coordinator, Bo Hardegree, Jim Bob Cooter, who's the Colts offensive coordinator, Chris Kokorek, who's the 49ers defensive line coach, Greg Olson, who's the Seahawks quarterbacks coach. That's not even all of them. That's a very long list. But I think just the first thing that pops out to me, his ability to put together a quality staff is a big part of the reason why I think he's high on this list. Lifer, ton of contacts. I trust him to put together a really nice staff of coaches under him if he were to be the guy. But tell me a little bit about what you've seen from him, or what you think his contributions to this team is, besides the fact he doesn't call plays. What is it about him that you want to put him so high on your list?
I think that the ability to assemble a good coaching staff is a big part of that.
Sure.
Zach Lyons, Stacking the Inbox, does probably the best
most
coaching profiles and I remember last year with the GM search, but he did a great job laying out all of the connections across the league with what he could potentially bring in as a coaching for his coaching staff. So that's a big part of it. I think that I've gone back and forth on the Bengals offense. I think that there are times that they, similar to the Eagles, where they kind of just rely on playing ISO ball down the sideline, but it's also like, I get why they would lean into that when you have elite one-on-one weapons on the outside.
Works. Right.
And Brian Callahan's shown the ability, when you don't have Joe Burrow or when T. Higgins is injured, to adapt that scheme and change, which adaptability is the biggest thing ahead of just knowing how to install the right scheme for 2024. Adaptability and, being able to change given change in circumstances. That's the biggest thing for an offensive orchestrator. I think it's definitely possible to have continuity year to year, as long as the kind of CEO of the offense stays in place, regardless of whether you're changing play callers. Obviously there is something for sequencing and knowing when to press the right buttons, but the week leading up to the game, you're pretty much laying everything out and designing your play sheet, and the play caller doesn't really have as big of a role in kind of how the offense looks on Sundays.
Right.
And then I think just being a player's coach and all of the reviews and reactions from people in the Bengals organization, people that cover the Bengals, there's a lot of just people that have good things to say about him. So I think he's about as close to a can't miss candidate as exists. And, even with that, there's still a good chance that he ends up being a bad head coach. That's how
that works.
I'm sure this whole thing is. But yeah, I feel pretty good about Brian Callahan.
The couple of things on the field that have stood out to me the most with the Bengals, and again, I don't know exactly how much of an impact he's had on these things, but first of all, we've seen in the Joe Burrow era, him as a quarterback, and in turn, a lot of the way that they play offense evolve a couple of times, and sometimes like in season. I think that from an adjustment standpoint, they've done a really impressive job, and I think that coaching has to go into that some. And then, especially early on in the Joe Burrow tenure, but kind of the whole time now, they've had success despite having some, at times, really, really bad offensive line play. And for the Titans in particular, that's what if they're going to want to find success anytime soon, you're going to need to be able to do that some. And those things, I think, matter a lot for the Titans in particular in hiring a new coach.
Yeah, I remember, let's see, 2022, like the first few weeks of the season, there was this big freak out about how like Joe Burrow can't beat cover 2 because he threw like a couple interceptions against cover 2 early in the season. And then they adjusted and, ended up working out those kinks. And then, again, like what they did with Jake Browning, what they did with a rotating cast at receiver this year, I think that, I feel pretty good about his ability to adapt to different situations.
Okay, last guy, and then we're getting out of here. The obvious number one tier one guy, Ben Johnson, offensive coordinator for the Lions, been a top or the top potential coaching candidate on the market for 2 years now. Had a chance to come out last year and turned down some opportunities. Kind of his path, it wouldn't shock, like you mentioned earlier, it wouldn't shock me if Slowick tried to take a pretty similar tack and like go back again. Because he's got a lot of opportunities this year, but it wouldn't shock me if he just didn't take anything that was offered to him. Ben Johnson, it sounds like he's going to take one this time. And the reasons why he are, man, talking is hard for me today. The reasons why he is the top candidate for a lot of guys, in large part has to do with the innovation and the way that the offense for that Lions team has really excelled for 2 years in a row now, with a guy that I think everybody agrees is a pretty limited quarterback, but they got some really nice weapons. They do some really creative things. And I want to start the conversation on him here. And our good pal, Jared Stillman, pushed back on you about this list you put out on Twitter or a couple days ago, earlier last week, in asking the question, the open-ended question, what makes Ben Johnson so much more of a clear, good coaching candidate than a guy like Bobby Slowick, who he's very high on? And I wanted to give you the platform and the opportunity to lay out the difference between those guys as candidates and what makes one so much more clearly a decent option than the other, in your opinion.
Yeah, so I studied the Lions offense pretty extensively this past summer, and then I did an all-pro video on my channel, and I was watching Penei Sewell. Normally I do 5 games per player. I'm watching Penei Sewell and Frank Ragnow, the center, and I ended up just going through every game from this season because their run blocking was so dominant, and I love watching good run blocking. So yeah, I've watched about every snap, every Lions offensive snap for this from the past 2 years, and I think that the number one thing that sticks out to me with Ben Johnson is how diverse and well designed the run game is. They have one of those schemes where everything kind of builds off of, every concept builds off of another concept. A lot of stuff that is designed to look the same, but get to different spots, create a lot of eye candy hesitation for linebackers, especially. They run a lot of trap and wham, where you're like leaving the defensive line unblocked, getting them into the backfield, and then you've got a linebacker or a tackle coming across and trap, wham block, creating those lanes. They run. He's one of the guys on the forefront of the counter, like blurring the lines between counter and duo, which is what the Titans use pretty frequently, where you're pulling a lot of players, but it's not necessarily offensive linemen. You're lining like fullbacks, H-backs up in the backfield, having them slice across the formation. There's just a lot of movement pre-snap and in the first few seconds of the play. But it's a really diverse run scheme. They run everything. Like they'll run power where they pull the tackle. They'll run outside zone. Like they just throw the kitchen sink at you. It's all executed well. Part of that does come back to the fact that the Lions have a really good offensive line. So, it's going to make everything look better. But I think a really well-designed rushing offense. And then passing the ball, I've been really impressed with it's kind of like Bobby Slowick, where like a lot of the best passing offenses are not in the NFL, are not really they're not inventing new things. Like Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay, they're just like running stuff from the 90s, and they might add like another motion on it, and that like gets kind of manipulates the nickel back's leverage or something like that. But there's only so many different permutations of routes that you can have on the field. And so it's not necessarily like people are inventing new things, but just a lot of like base concepts that I think are really good for Jared Goff's skill set specifically, because the one thing that he is comfortable with is like he will fire in the backside dig. He'll stand in the pocket, throw over the middle. So they do that a lot. They also have really good, more designer plays with like trick plays. A lot of Sam Laporta's touchdowns this year he's just been screaming wide open. They got him a couple touchdowns with the same Bobby Slowick, Tim Kelly, originally Kyle Shanahan. I'm sure someone else, did that before them.
Right.
Where you fake the deep over the post and then have them cut back the safety. It just has no way of sticking with it. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's just like, it's a really well-designed passing and rushing game. They use a lot of motion. They do a great job of getting these hybrid tight end receiver types and using them in different ways. Sam Laporta, have them line up in the slot, have them line up out wide, line them up in the backfield. Same thing with Jahmyr Gibbs. And when you look at guys like Tyjae Spears, Chigakonkwo, and people that have more like versatile skill sets like that, I think he could do a lot of cool things. And then I would also, the last thing I would say with Ben Johnson is Dan Campbell has had historically, he's been one of the best fourth down decision makers.
Yes. And time management just in general.
Right. And so like, even except for like going for it against the Cowboys, where
over aggressiveness is the issue, not under aggressiveness.
My thing is like, I will take the over aggressiveness over.
And that's such a bad, that's just, that was such a bad example. That's just being tilted. Like, I get it. Everyone's done that on Madden.
Yep. And that obviously has more to do with Dan Campbell, but I would assume that Ben Johnson's at least in partial agreement with that philosophy. So,
sure. Well, and even if the philosophy aside, clearly he's good at executing in an aggressive manner. Like he's got to dial up the play for when you're going for it on 4th and 7 in your own territory.
Any situation where it's not just like basic structure of the offense, and it's like we've got to design, like I call them designer plays, where it's like it's not just like we're running dagger, we're running outside zone. It's like this is kind of a special situation. Like we're targeting this safety. We got to get him, into a false step and like do this. Like he can make stuff happen in those situations.
Let me play devil's advocate real quick one last time. And it's less devil's advocate and more just like maybe it's my contrarian blinker going off, my contrarian alarm being like, are you sure that everybody, because everybody seems to be rowing in the same direction on this guy, and for a lot of good reasons. But when you ask anybody that knows anything about these things, okay, why is Ben Johnson your number one candidate? The answers are always along the lines of, I mean, look at the offense, look at the designer plays, look at the execution as a coordinator. And a lot of the discussion around him leaves out anything about the kind of leader he is, the kind of, and again, this is where the guesswork comes in, knowing what he'd be like as a head coach, how his players feel about him, how the people in and around their organization feel about him as a guy that could be the one calling all the shots, overseeing two coordinators underneath him. Do you have any opinion on, maybe we're overlooking the fact that he could be the next wonderkin coordinator that just can't cut it as an actual head coach?
Yeah, I get a lot of Brandon Staley like flashbacks.
Me too. Like I'm burned by that a little bit.
Because yeah, man, there's we keep saying it, but there's just so much more that goes into being a head coach than being good at calling one side of the ball. And like once I watched some Ben Johnson like interviews and press conferences and was really impressed by his philosophy. And I was like, yeah, this is exactly what I thought with Brandon Staley. Luckily, like I didn't have any public like Brandon Staley's revolutionizing football takes or anything like that.
You didn't go full ringer.
Well, I'm clear on that front, but like I remember just privately thinking like, oh yeah, Brandon Staley, best coaching candidate on the market. So yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of it is less to do specifically with Ben Johnson and more just kind of the standard thing that the caveat that we've had with all of these candidates, which is that, he could have a real difficult time, like dealing with egos in the locker room or whatever it is. I don't have any specific insight.
We don't know.
Yeah. But it's not like a sure thing by any means.
But you hear little morsels. I mean, the most recent one I've heard is what you mentioned earlier in the episode, where you said a guy in and around Detroit covering them as a beat reporter. He's coming out and saying, I think that the DC would be a better head coach than the OC. Mm-hmm. That kind of thing, that just those start to accumulate in the back of your head, and the alarm bells go off. So I think ultimately it just goes to show there is no such thing as a can't miss guy. And no matter how good you are as a coordinator, until you are a head coach and we see you try to do the thing, it's impossible to really know whether you can do the thing or not. I have one last question for you before we get you out of here. And you've been so generous with your time today, so we appreciate that. Your list here, you got tier 1, Ben Johnson, tier 2, Brian Callahan and Mike McDonald, I think. Tier 3, Aaron Glenn and Antonio Pierce. Tier 4, Kafka and Slowick. Tier 5, Dan Quinn. Tier 90, Brian Johnson. Is there a guy that the Titans haven't requested an interview with that if you could walk into St. Thomas Sports Park today, into the C-suite offices and say, hey, you need to call this guy today? Like, why are you not asking this guy to be an interview candidate? Is there a guy that's like that for you that you'd really like for them to call?
Yeah, I think, after looking at the scores from last night and seeing Tampa Bay score 32 points, I think you've got to include their offensive coordinator, Dave Canales. I'm kidding about the score from last night, but
right.
But yeah,
he wasn't on your list until 17 hours ago.
Right. Yeah. He is. I actually don't know like what his if he has any connection to the Shanahan tree, but it's a very similar style offense. And I think like his work with Baker Mayfield and Geno Smith is pretty impressive. He's a guy I would like to see them interview. Frank Smith, I believe, the Dolphins OC. Another guy where it's like, it's hard to tell when you have a play caller and then kind of a scheme designer like Mike McDaniel. It's hard to tell who exactly is responsible for their offense. But he's another person that has just glowing reviews from everyone around him. I'm surprised that he hasn't gotten any interview nods. And then I
he's under Eric Bieniemy, just like under a guy that's a stud offensive head coach, and nobody knows why he gets no calls.
Yeah, I would also include Drew Petzing for the Cardinals there.
Yeah,
I think,
heard a lot about him early in the year. Folks being like, "I love what they're doing," and then it kind of died off a little bit.
Yeah, they just didn't win enough. But I think
the vibes were high.
They were doing some cool stuff. It could be, I mean, it could be the head coach too, though, because I think they were doing a lot of cool stuff defensively with even worse talent on defense. Like one of the most talent barren rosters that you'll ever see, and they were at least hanging in there.
I'm totally blank. What's his name again? The head coach in Arizona,
Jonathan Gannon.
Yeah,
Jonathan Gannon. So do you think
he's a good
Nick Sirianni a Jonathan Gannon, Shane Steichen merchant? Is that the ultimate take here after today's episode?
Yeah. Jonathan Gannon's a good reminder that vibes for head coaching candidates sometimes, evaluating based off of vibes can bite you, because
him and Dan Campbell, the same, like everybody that you made fun of the summer of their hiring, and then it's like, whoops. I would throw Sirianni in there, but turns out he is just a goofball.
I don't remember people making fun of Dan Campbell as much as Gannon. Like
the kneecap biting interview got run for the whole summer, and like it was a joke, but there was a lot of people being like, classic Detroit, they got a goofball in there. It's not serious.
Really? I didn't notice as much negativity.
I didn't notice it at the time, but I've seen in the past month some compilations of some very bad, very public takes. Yeah.
I wish he would have never done that, because it's like there's a lot of people that think he's this meathead, like just dumbass because of that, when it's not really the case. Like he's a smart guy. So
he runs on nothing but caffeine all day, every day. To your question, by the way, on Canales, it looks like he's been a Pete Carroll guy like his whole life. He was with him at USC and then with him in Seattle forever. And then, so yeah. Okay.
I saw an interview, like a long interview with him on some Bucks like podcast. And he was actually going into a lot of detail. And I like if he becomes a candidate, you can just search like Dave Canales interview and it'll probably pop up. But he seems like a really smart guy.
All right. Well, James, thanks so much for your time today, man. Very generous with your time. Thanks for the insight, as always. We love having you on. We'll have to have you on again soon. We got draft coming up, but last year we did a great episode with you, just kind of previewing the draft. So we'll do that in the coming weeks. What do you got going on over at the channel right now? You're already headlong into the draft, right?
Yep. I just did a hour-long 3-round mock draft. Only had to re-record it one time with all the Ohio State people.
Okay. I was like, what?
Back into the returning to school.
Right.
And then I'm just firing out draft reports. I'm getting a late start on my work this week. I'm pretty busy early in the week, so probably nothing on the first round of the playoffs, but definitely going to do some breakdowns of the divisional round and conference championship. But outside of that, it's going to be draft season, and then probably take a few weeks to do some free agent targets.
Yeah, the YouTube channel is awesome, but I got to hype up the draft tool you have on the A to Z website real quick, because I know you started it last year. My understanding is you're doing it again this year, right? You're setting that up.
Yeah.
Is it already live with your initial
live? It's my pinned tweet on on X. Yeah.
So guys, genuinely, you should go check it out. It's one of the best draft guides out there. Local coverage, support local guys, interactive draft guide with evaluations on different players. You can sort by position and all these different things. It's very cool. He does a great job with it.
Sort, filter, click on the row, and it's got their scouting report pulled up.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, so go check out the YouTube channel, A to Z Film Room. Check out his pinned tweet. He's got the draft guide set up on there. And like I said, we'll have to have you on for a little draft primer episode in the coming weeks. But until then, James, thank you for your time. We appreciate you. Appreciate you, producer JT, being here as always. We'll be back Thursday, 5:30 p.m. Central Standard God's time, talking about, I don't know, the playoffs or something crazy will happen between now and then. We'll talk about it. Until then, I'm your host, Easton Freeze. This has been the Hot Read Podcast. We'll talk to you on Thursday.